All right, good afternoon. Thank you for joining on what is an important topic for me and many across the defense industrial base, and specifically for national security, which is the weaponization of the periodic table, securing critical mineral supply chains. My name is Derek Lemke. I've spent nearly 2 decades in supply chain itself, the last 13 of which at RTX and Raytheon, most leading supply chain strategy there. I've now hopped sides. I'm on the tech end, and I am working to deploy tech-enabled solutions to help our warfighter get in a position to be ready for the next mission. My background has been on metals, materials themselves, both securing the materials, but also the parts that are vital to national defense, and again, working with technology to help enable that and especially scale it across a large organization. I'm joined here today by Griff.
Hi everyone, Griffin Fletcher, focusing on XSB, one of the companies that we recently acquired that focuses in on product level intelligence, helping us get at connecting engineering and procurement personas so that we can pull out all of the rich information from technical data packages to ultimately get to higher level of visibility for our critical minerals. Previously served as an analyst focused on the F-35. There was a samarium cobalt magnet that was identified as ultimately being sourced there, coming from China, and we focused on identifying that supply chain so that we could identify alternate sources of supply after the shipments of F-35s were halted just about 2 years ago. So today we're going to be diving into the periodic table and how our technology unpacks that visibility for critical minerals.
A little bit later here, we'll go in deep about Exeger, our tech, and how we help enable some of these solutions. But again, I want to focus on the problem at hand, which is the periodic table, which really embodies the essential building blocks of modern technology, from rare earth elements in energy systems to semiconductors that are critical for advanced electronics and defense systems. The manipulation and access of these materials through export restrictions, hoarding, price manipulation, and monopolistic control creates vulnerabilities across our supply chain. And it is the deliberate use of these critical resources as a geopolitical weapon that demonstrates the ever-changing shift in the nature of power, especially in the global arena where dominance is increasingly defined by control over materials rather than territory alone. So today we are going to talk some of the challenges supply chain leaders have, basic things like access to data, how we can improve upon that. Griff will talk specifically about what we're seeing in terms of restrictions for access around critical minerals. Specifically, recently there's been some materials that have been fully restricted from China, antimony, germanium, and gallium, to name a few. And finally, we'll talk a little bit about our platform, some of the problems that we're helping clients solve, especially in getting in deep within the defense industrial base, how we get them from a reactive state to a more proactive state. There we go. So a little bit about supply chain. Generally, it is complex. So if we look at an aircraft manufacturer, for example, up to 90% of the cost to build an aircraft is outsourced throughout the supply chain. That leaves about 10% that is in the direct control of somebody who's sitting at the top, somebody who's building parts, manufacturing airplanes, manufacturing weapon systems. This is a problem that is kind of faced at scale across the defense industrial base, something that I'm very familiar with in my time at RTX. There I had over 13,000 suppliers and over $20 billion of spend. So answering simple questions like, where's the critical mineral content in my parts, became very difficult, magnitude by both our information systems, but as well as the scale of our supply chain. Again, any given part and component, especially critical minerals, we're talking about that nth tier of supply. So that could be 4, 5, 6 tiers down deep in many cases. Again, critical mineral content, critical minerals and materials are embedded within our parts, within our processes, often difficult to unearth and to identify where these are providing and contributing to risks across the supply chain. So those are the very things that we work on with our customers. And the threat of disruption. We've seen it over the last 4 years. It's real, it's intensifying, and it's unlikely to abate. We're seeing shortages for parts, components, materials that are impacting our readiness and exposing our weaknesses. When Russia invaded Ukraine, we saw sanctions on things like nickel, aluminum, and titanium, for which we were highly reliant on. Even weather and natural disasters can be our enemy, limiting our ability to produce the vital components required for production. We saw this most recently with Hurricane Helene. There's a quartz mine that is responsible for the production of 80% of the world's quartz supply. So that one event took that single source of supply offline. It can all be a little bit overwhelming. We hear it from our clients as they start to address these challenges. And the risks are very real. So we work with our clients on a day-to-day basis, working to get to that reactive, proactive state and provide them with the data intelligence to make those controlled solutions within their supply chain. Again, the operational footprint in supply chain can be vast, it can be immense. And what we're seeing is that supply chain is the new battlefield. Our adversaries are taking targeted actions deep within supply chain which impact our readiness. With limited ability to see beyond the first tier, there is much that is outside of our control. The second issue is that our data is fragmented, and so is our process and our technology. Data is difficult to aggregate, difficult to define. It exists everywhere, but it is in no one single repository or place. Generally, it's in silos. That's in a design document, in an engineering system, in a quality note, or most likely sitting on somebody's spreadsheet on somebody's desktop. These are the solutions that we work to aggregate and work to define, pulling this into our knowledge graph and providing a single pane of glass for our customers to see risks on their parts, suppliers, and materials. This disparate data across these various systems makes it difficult to understand the true nature of a threat that exists for any one person or any one organization who's assessing their readiness. Again, global dependency. We are increasingly dependent on global sources of supply for critical materials and minerals. In 2019, the US shut down its last titanium sponge production facility. Today, we are 100% reliant on that material from Japan and Saudi Arabia. Both China and Russia are trying to flood the market with cheap sponge, which makes it difficult for US producers to start production in the United States. And we're also seeing that the impact of one regulation can cascade through the supply chain at all nodes, be that a tariff, be that an export restriction. Understanding that impact at what tier of supply is critical to make the right decisions. Finally, adversarial influence and impact. Again, multiple adversarial threat vectors are deployed simultaneously, targeting critical defense information and defense critical materials. There's a reason why China picked to restrict antimony, germanium, gallium. They know it will impact us. Griff here just shortly will walk through those impacts and what we found throughout the supply chain. But what we are seeing is that they need these materials themselves. So supply chains are starting to compete against supply chains. So when we think about the next stage in warfare, it really is the battlefield is being defined within supply chain and those critical materials themselves.
So what's on the screen here is that Chinese announcement back in early December. They noted, and there were some precursors to this, that gallium, germanium, and antimony were going to be restricted. We have a deep bench of language experts here at Exeger. We looked through this announcement and previous announcements, and the language is a bit broad. It looks at any organization or individual in any country or region that is transferring or providing these materials will be held accountable according to Chinese law. Now, the key piece here is it's not only direct shipments coming from China of gallium, antimony, or germanium. Any intermediary steps are also covered by this announcement. So if China is producing gallium or germanium, it's going to Belgium for refining, it's getting magnetized in Germany, and then it ends up in the United States, ultimately in a finished good. That is covered by this announcement. And as we've seen changes happen daily. New tariff restrictions against Colombia. Everything seems to be shifting on a daily basis. So the key here is really understanding visibility into your supply chain so that any future announcements that come down the pike, we're able to monitor those and immediately assess the impact of those restrictions. So as we noted, gallium and germanium were initially announced back in August of 23, similarly for graphite last year. They buckled down on those in December of last year, restricting all exports of those, again, through that indirect supply chain. We, the United States, have recognized the need for certain elements like samarium, cobalt, or neodymium that are in permanent magnets that are in our highest performing aircraft. Now, we've recognized the need here. DFARS rules are in place so that we don't ultimately source those from adversarial jurisdictions, but China's dominance extends beyond just the materials that we've noted already. Across the periodic table, we are 100% import reliant for 10 critical minerals, 50% import reliant for over 30 critical minerals. And again, all roads truly do lead back to China. Even if a product is manufactured in friendly Five Eyes partners, really that supply chain at some point is leading back to China. So today, it's antimony, gallium, and germanium. Yesterday, it was samarium, cobalt magnets. Tomorrow, it's everything down the periodic table. So it's important to have that visibility into your supply chain so that you can see that immediate impact. Now, we could spend the entire 48-hour conference here focused on any one of these critical minerals. Importantly, antimony used in flame retardants, lead acid batteries, started back in World War II for the hardening of lead bullets. It's predominantly sourced through stibnite ore, which is often co-mined alongside gold. There are other products, gallium and germanium, often used in semiconductors, antimony, often used in solder for semiconductors. They're used across defense applications. All three different minerals are noted by both DoD and DOE as critical minerals for their use in applications. So here we noted at the top antimony. It notes that we're 80% import reliant on antimony. Now this number can be a bit of a misnomer. We haven't mined antimony domestically in over 20 years. So all of the antimony that we're processing is coming from allied nations, coming directly from China, and that 80% figure, the other 20% there is recycling efforts for antimony from previous products. Gallium, we're 100% import reliant. Germanium, we're over 50% import reliant. And even if it ultimately doesn't touch an adversarial nation like China or Russia, they are increasing their ownership of refining and magnetizing facilities in allied nations. There's an example here recently, just 4 years ago, a Chinese SOE ultimately acquired a gallium recycling site there in Germany. So it extends beyond just the materials flowing through those locations. It's actually the ownership. They're trying to find ways across to own it here in the United States and abroad in other nations. So there are some ways out of this, both as organizations and here in the U.S., developing domestic resources. The Stibnite Gold Project, expected to come online in the next 4 years. When it's fully operational after a few years, it's expected to meet about 50% of our antimony demand this year. So putting a dent into it, but there's still about half of that demand that we wouldn't be able to meet. Additionally, friendshoring and diversification. Efforts through the U.S. Geological Service here in the United States, Canada, and Australia. Notably in the news, Greenland recently is a potential source there for those diversification efforts, uncovering new deposits and then developing those resources. Additionally, recycling and urban mining as well as re-engineering, both of these efforts require us to understand where these critical minerals are in our products. We can't engineer our way out of the problem if we don't first know where these critical minerals are in our supply chains, in our weapon systems, and in our parts. In an analysis that we performed just hours after those restrictions were announced, we identified that there were 11,000 parts in our data set that were noted as containing antimony. If we looked at DLA's Federal Logistics Information System, FLIS would note that there are about 500 different parts that contain antimony. When we look at the nested specifications inside that data set, we were able to expand that number from the 500 or 600 that DLA would see themselves to 11,000 parts across our data set. Most of these described as diodes, batteries, semiconductors. Really where this becomes useful is when you contextualize parts with suppliers and weapon systems through the lens of criticality. We identified over 1,200 single-source NINs that are tied to germanium that are used in critical capacities. If these parts are not available, these weapon systems will not function. And our adversaries would love to have access to this information. We have the full mapping there. Happy to walk through anyone here at the conclusion through those weapon systems, but obfuscated here, obviously, for this presentation. We identified 7 different weapon systems that are connected to over 1,000 NINs that contain germanium. So really looking through the lens of vulnerability and criticality, where are these critical minerals in our parts through the lens of essentiality? If this part is not there, this weapon system will not function.
So this is the very problem that we help a number of clients, both in the defense industrial base and in commercial applications, solve every day. And again, when you're working with such a large supply chain, the ability to connect from a weapon system to a single supplier site, contextualize of what they're doing at that site. Are you mining? Are you refining? Are you processing? Are you alloying? That's a very important distinction to know of where your choke point is within the supply chain. And this is what we help to uncover with our technology. Griff here is going to walk through that in a little bit, but essentially, how can you start to identify exposure across your vast multi-source supply chain? How can you size those criticalities, those dependencies, and really get in a position where you can take some level of action? We do have clients that are working to stockpile materials. We have clients that are working to do offtake agreements. Working with those new sources within domestic capacity to bring on antimony in the United States. They require some level of commitment, and so they're very aggressively shopping for partners that are going to commit volume to them. We have the ability to not only size the impact of your parts, but also size the volume of your buy across any given weapon system. And those secure supply programs are really enabling folks to get ahead of this issue and to be in a better position, both from a security supply and from a cost management perspective. So how can we secure our competitive advantage? It really starts with your supply chain and your supply chain maturity model. We work with clients all day. We're trying to meet them wherever they're at in their journey. Generally, it may start with just reaching out to those tier ones, trying to understand where they're at from a risk readiness perspective. Do they know the suppliers that they're buying from? Do they know that level of provenance? The second piece is getting a little bit more advanced, getting into that technical or that product level our review. Putting that lens on the supply chain helps enable action decision making. Finally, where we want to get our partners and our clients is into that proactive place. So looking at their data, running regression analysis, running what-if analysis so that they can war game scenarios against their supply chain, understand the impact of any one given decision, and how they can potentially de-risk their supply chains.
So this slide here notes the different areas where we focus. Exeger really started in that risk and compliance space. We were the monitorship for Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Corporation after they were found to be doing business with Mexican drug cartels. So our initial focus was looking at financial risk and foreign ownership control and influence risk across those supply chains there. And really everything that we did had to hold up in a court of law. No black boxes for all of our data, able to show that full source provenance for everything that we're identifying. Entering COVID, suddenly everyone was saying that they were capable of producing personal protective equipment. A mom and pop shop was saying that they could produce 10 million masks tomorrow, and we helped look at all of those different suppliers to identify who actually had the financial means, the operational footprint to ultimately produce that personal protective equipment. Recently, over the past 8 months, we've made 3 acquisitions that are really focused on that product level specificity. What are the parts and components that are on your supply chain that go into the products and software? So we'll walk through a few of those and really how we get into that critical mineral visibility. Additionally, cyber. We've invested heavily in generating software bills of material off of just binary data, and then ultimately analyzing those SBOMs, really thinking of these 3 different legs of a chair, legs of a stool. Your supply chain is dependent on each of these different areas, and your success will be dependent on how well they're orchestrated and connected together. Pull this here to the next one. And this really touches on all of the different areas and different buckets that folks have to consider when trying to orchestrate supply chain risk management. Everything from the actual program itself to the NINs and cage codes, end-of-life management, connections with tariffs. This digital thread is not only within the 4 walls of your organization, but outside of it as well. It connects all the way down to the hole in the ground, to that actual program as it's functioning, down through end-of-life management. So everything that we see here at the top of this slide is capabilities that we've acquired through a company by the name of Versed AI. Versed AI came out of Cambridge. Some brilliant folks decided to map supply chains and understand buyer-supplier relationships contextualized with the products that are bought and supplied. So we look not just only at shipping data, but also financial reports, crawling the open internet for company websites and press releases, doing logo identification on images and video analysis to pull together buyer-supplier relationships. Additionally, everything here on the bottom of this slide comes from a company by the name of XSB. XSB was co-developed alongside the Defense Logistics Agency, has been working with them for 25 years, working with their FLIS data system to help make sense of all of these particular parts. Every new part that's ran through DLA's FLIS or GSA Advantage is run through our technology first. That's to see, have we seen this part before? When a cataloger in Battle Creek, Michigan there for the DLA is logging that new part, they need to know, have we seen this part before? Maybe a different part description, a different part number, but it's really a form, fit, function alternate for the NIN that we already have cataloged. Additionally, we're looking at commercial catalogs, Eaton, Fastenal, crawling through Amazon to put together a complete view of the parts that are connected to different weapon systems. This is only useful if it's contextualized with common ontologies and references. You need to know that this particular part is made up of this UNS alloy, and this UNS alloy has these chemistries, these elements, these weights nested there within that. Additionally, you need to understand it for trade or commerce purposes, looking at HSCs for shipments of where those are ultimately coming from. And we've been doing this for a while. We understand supplier capabilities, and we can walk through, when you have an understanding of the processes and materials that go into a part, if there's a readiness issue with that part, you can identify alternate suppliers by who has supplied the government with parts that match those specifications previously. And we'll walk that through in just a few examples here. So often in organizations, data is situated in different places, as Derek noted, and with different levels of product technicality. Sometimes all you know is that I am procuring paper towels. Sometimes you know that you're procuring a highly engineered item with over 10,000 technical data packages that are constituting that particular item. So we can generate a bill of material in under 40 seconds when we're just working with that general information. When we have those technical data packages, we can ingest those at scale, a rate of a drawing every minute and a half. And I think what's important here is meeting our customers where they are in their supply chain risk management journey and where that data is available, leveraging different tools to pull out those insights. And again, as I noted previously, we were very focused initially on that entity level risk, developing over 30 million different unstructured data sources, 16,000 structured data sources like Bureau Van Dyke and Dun & Bradstreet. We're pulling all of that information in to give a complete view on a supplier's risk, looking at things like financial risk, cybersecurity, reputational, criminal, and regulatory risk. But particularly for supply chains, you need to understand this with the products that they're providing. If you have financial risk at a single source bearing supplier, that represents a very different risk than a multi-source paper towel supplier for your organization. So you need to understand how the risk at the entity level and the product coalesce. And here this really walks through the process of how we're able to unpack that technical information and get to that critical mineral visibility. We'll work with our customers to take and build a bill of material off of technical data packages, off of hardware bill of material, or off of those general part descriptions. We ingest all of that information. We then run it through our knowledge graph and identify the supply chains down to that end tier. We'll then identify the high-risk relationships and value chains that are there within that supply chain. Where do I have an entity with financial risk, a Chinese SOE, an entity that ultimately can't manufacture this particular component? And then we'll visualize that in a single pane of glass so that you can see the manufacturers contextualized with the products that they provide. I want to take a moment to work through some of the exciting developments that we're working on in the critical mineral space.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Griff. And walking this through just a little bit more granular detail of what this technology is and how we think about applying it, especially those point solutions to wherever somebody is at on that maturity curve from a data visibility standpoint. Griff talked a little bit about the ability to create a BOM itself, right? So in the absence of a bill of material, we're now leveraging AI to build a bill of material representative of the part that somebody's procuring in the supply chain. So example, a landing gear, right? A landing gear is generally made out of forging. It's made out of titanium. It may contain some bushings made out of aluminum, nickel, bronze. Also, it's containing some sort of wheel housing as well as brake housing. We take that data, we build that kind of product-based view, and we apply it to our commerce data. So we subscribe to, I think it's 16,000 structured data sources, 30 million unstructured data sources. we're crawling that database. So we're taking that product lens, we're looking through all the different commerce data, we're looking at our supplier knowledge graph of supplier capabilities, and trying to hone in on where in the supply chain do we see a unique pinpoint. So in this case, that landing gear, right, that titanium, we would have identified that there have been roughly about 5 sources of supply globally that are capable of making titanium 6-4 grade titanium. Furthermore on that, when we talk about the elemental or the chemistry makeup of that titanium, we'd identified that they have a restriction due to the vanadium content within that part. Unveiling a wholly different supply chain. So now you're looking at probably the 8th, 9th tier down of where you've got a critical mineral restriction or a critical mineral dependency that is going to evidently at some point impact your supply chain. And so how can you get ahead of that more systematically?
I think this example really brings it all together. Army Material Command reached out to us with a readiness issue for a wiring harness on the Bradley fighting vehicle. They weren't sure what was driving this readiness issue. They provided us with 85 PDFs, including drawings and text that were connected to this wiring harness. So not only were there actual wires, the cables themselves, and that outer sheath, we identified by unpacking those technical data packages that there were actually 3 copper castings where that wiring harness connected to the Bradley itself. So we looked at those copper castings, long lead time items. One of them was obsolete, and this was actually the part that was driving that readiness issue. They let us know that if they were to actually look through those drawings themselves, that would have taken them 4 to 6 weeks to parse through all of those drawings, and because of that long time, likely wouldn't have been an effort that they would have undergone themselves. We were able to unpack all of those drawings in under 2 hours, identify those 3 copper castings, and identify the copper casting that was obsolete. We also identified there was antimony present within this copper casting because we understand the UNS alloy and what it's constituted of. When we understand it's not just a copper casting, pulling off the prints, it's a copper centrifugal casting, ASTM B271. We can look across procurement data to see who has provided the DLA or the services with parts that match those specifications over the past 25 years. So we can see the vendors here on the slide having provided DLA, provided the services with parts that match those specifications, that last procurement date, how many parts have they provided that match those, and then we'll ultimately risk assess those different entities. Maybe 3 of them have gone bankrupt over the past few years, and we likely wouldn't want to reach out to those entities. So we can provide a short list of entities that could provide an alternative part for that alternative part qualification, really the full scale, identifying the cause of the readiness issue, and we're working with large DIB customers to do this at scale. For one of them, it's over 300,000 parts, 24 billion in spend annually, and we're unpacking all of those technical data packages, all of their parts, to pull out their critical mineral presence, identify alternate sources of supply, and really get after this readiness issue.
Thanks, Griff. Another project that we're very focused and engaged on right now is predictive price for critical minerals. This is actually a project that we are been contracted with DARPA to help support. And as part of this, we are looking at those critical mineral markets, the actual cost of the materials themselves. We're modeling what the should cost should be for those materials and actually looking at what they're selling at. So if we take a look at gallium, for example, right? China's been manipulating the market for gallium for a number of years. We can see that they're selling it way below what it should cost to make that product. We're utilizing these tools and these models now to work specifically with U.S. interests in mining and refining so that we can start to make decision points around at what point of entry does it make sense for us to invest in the high level capital equipment, mining resources that are needed to stand up production here in the United States. It's also a forward indicator of risk. So if you're in the defense industrial base and you're making parts and you've got critical mineral content in your supply chain, if there is going to be a price spike due to a restriction or an event, how can you model that scenario throughout and understand what the price impact will be to your overall enterprise or your overall mission that you're supporting? So this is an area that we continue to develop on. I think we've done about 6 models to date, and we're continuing across the periodic table and starting to integrate these insights and this technology into the platform itself.
An additional point on that there is China's playbook is not only export restrictions. Changing energy prices has a direct correlation and impact to these critical mineral prices. So we're really looking at all of the levers that China and others have at their disposal, how they're using those to manipulate the prices and ultimate availability of these critical minerals.
Finally, from the massive data, kind of seeing the forest through the trees, how are people actually utilizing it? How are they operationalizing it across their supply chain? We work today with many of those key primes in the defense industrial base. One, for example, those 300,000 parts that we categorized for them, we actually brought out what is the weightage or what is the tonnage of material that they're buying across their entire supply chain. 150 million pounds of material is what we were able to identify. Again, this was unpacking the parts within their supply chain and then bouncing that off their master production schedule to give a forward-looking view of how much material are they going to need over the next 5 years to support their readiness and their rates to their clients and their customers. Specifically, where this became very important was when Russia invaded Ukraine. At that point, we started to see restrictions on aluminum, steel, nickel, as well as titanium. Again, a critical point within the defense industrial base and the supply chain. Within hours, they were able to risk assess that they had 3,000 suppliers that were dependent on titanium, and they were able to identify where they had foreign ownership and control, or they had dependencies on Russian or Chinese sources of supply. Then they were able to take that data set, roughly about 7 million pounds of titanium, and go to domestic mills. And with that data, they were able to negotiate contracts for capacity with those domestic mill players so that they could resource all of their global titanium into a secure supply chain. In total, they drove about $150 million of savings throughout the process, and were also able to de-risk their supply chains very strategically and away from those adversarial sources. So we just wanted to show a few examples of how you win, right? How do you take the data? How do you operationalize it? I know we're having these discussions with a number of key players, both within many of the key primes, but also with a number of program offices, on how you start to connect the dots. And again, generally it starts with a data issue, right? Where is my data? How do I get insights out of that data? And second, how do we start to operationalize that?
And I think when a antimony export restriction is announced, often procurement will reach out to engineering saying, where is antimony across our products? And a lot of finger pointing between engineering and procurement there to identify where that ultimately is. What we're hoping to do, and what we're doing for a lot of our defense industrial-based customers, is connecting the data there so that they're able to see when a product is designed. We're integrating with product lifecycle management and ERP systems. So when a product is first designed, where is that critical mineral presence? How is this going to cause problems for procurement down the road because of what we're seeing there across the periodic table? So really connecting, championing that visibility. You won't be able to track or respond to something that you can't see. So when the next export restriction or tariff is announced, you're able to see that immediate impact across that different product lines. Identifying that impact and moving folks from a war room in response to these to ultimate war gaming. Where can we get proactive with our supply chain risk?
Great. I appreciate everybody listening in. If there's any questions, I think we're going to stick around for a little bit. Our booth, maybe 5 rows down, you'll find us, Exeger. We're happy to give a demonstration and platform if there's any additional questions. Thank you.